The rain hammered against the windshield as I sat in my rental car, watching mourners file into Sacred Heart Chapel. Black umbrellas bobbed like crows across the parking lot, and through the gray curtain of water, I could see my brothers, Marcus and Dylan, standing at the entrance like sentries. They wore identical dark suits and grim expressions, their eyes scanning each face that passed through the chapel doors. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I was supposed to be there too. I was supposed to be saying goodbye to the woman who raised me, who bandaged my scraped knees and cheered at my high school graduation. Instead, I was sitting in a car 200 yards away, banned from my own mother's funeral by the very sons she had loved unconditionally. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, Rear Admiral Sarah Mitchell, a woman who had commanded naval operations in 3 different oceans, reduced to hiding in a parking lot like some common criminal. But as I watched that chapel fill with people who knew nothing about the family war that had torn us apart, I had no idea that in less than an hour, everything would change. The beginning of the end started 3 years ago, though the cracks in our family foundation had been forming much longer than that. Mom, Eleanor Mitchell, had always been the glue that held our fractured family together. Dad died when I was 12, leaving Mom to raise 3 kids on a secretary's salary while working double shifts at the county courthouse. Marcus was the eldest at 35, a successful corporate lawyer who lived in a mansion in Westchester County with his wife Patricia and their twin boys. Dylan, 32, owned 3 auto dealerships across Connecticut and spent most of his time collecting vintage motorcycles and complaining about taxes. Then there was me, the middle child at 34, who had chosen a very different path. I joined the Navy at 18, much to Mom's initial dismay. She had dreams of me becoming a teacher or a nurse, something safe, something close to home. But I was drawn to the ocean, to the discipline, to the challenge of proving myself in a world that didn't always welcome women with open arms. Over 16 years, I had worked my way up from ensign to rear admiral, commanding respect in situations where failure meant lives lost. The problem was, success in the Navy meant long deployments, missed holidays, and phone calls that replaced hugs. While Marcus and Dylan built their lives within driving distance of Mom's small house in Bridgeport, Connecticut, I was stationed everywhere from Norfolk to San Diego to overseas bases that Mom couldn't even pronounce. The guilt was a constant companion. Every missed birthday, every Christmas spent on a ship somewhere in the Pacific, every time Mom's voice sounded a little smaller during our weekly phone calls, it all accumulated like barnacles on a hull, weighing me down with the knowledge that I was choosing duty over family. But Mom never complained, not directly. She would send care packages to whatever base I was stationed at, filled with homemade cookies that somehow stayed fresh across thousands of miles. She kept a world map on her kitchen wall with pins marking every place I'd been deployed, and she would tell her neighbors about her daughter, the Admiral, with a pride that both warmed my heart and broke it. Marcus and Dylan saw things differently. To them, I was the selfish daughter who abandoned Mom for a career. They were the ones who showed up for Sunday dinners, who fixed her leaky faucet and shoveled her driveway. They were present for the small, daily acts of love that military service had stolen from me. The tension simmered beneath the surface for years, erupting only during major holidays when I managed to get leave. There would be snide comments about Sarah finally gracing us with her presence, or pointed questions about when I planned to settle down and start a real family. I would grit my teeth, remind myself that family came first, and try to keep the peace for Mom's sake. Everything changed when Mom got sick. The diagnosis came through a voicemail I received while reviewing operational reports in my office at Naval Base San Diego. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3. The words hit me like a torpedo to the hull, leaving me gasping and struggling to stay afloat. I immediately requested emergency leave and flew to Connecticut, but by the time I arrived, Marcus and Dylan had already established themselves as Mom's primary caregivers. They had researched doctors, scheduled treatments, and created a rotation system for taking her to appointments. In their eyes, I could see the unspoken accusation, "Where were you when she needed you most?" The next 18 months were a nightmare of coast-to-coast flights, stolen weekends, and increasingly desperate attempts to balance my naval responsibilities with Mom's deteriorating condition. I used every bit of leave time, called in favors, and even took unpaid leave when regulations allowed. But it was never enough. The final break came during Mom's last hospitalization. I had been granted compassionate leave and was sitting by her bedside when she slipped into a coma. For 3 days, we took turns holding her hand, reading to her, and pretending that she might still wake up and tell us everything would be okay.
On the 3rd night, while I was grabbing coffee from the hospital cafeteria, Marcus and Dylan cornered me in the hallway. Their faces were haggard from grief and exhaustion, but their voices were steady with accumulated resentment. "This is your fault," Marcus said quietly, his lawyer's training keeping his tone controlled even in his anger. "All those years of putting your precious career first, and now she's dying without ever really knowing her own daughter?" Dylan, always more direct, stepped closer. "You've been gone for everything that mattered. Every milestone, every crisis, every moment she needed you. And now you want to waltz in here and play the grieving daughter?" I tried to explain about duty, about the men and women under my command who depended on me, about the impossible choices that came with wearing the uniform. But my words sounded hollow even to my own ears. How do you explain to someone who has never left their hometown that sometimes serving your country means sacrificing your family? "She always defended you," Marcus continued, his voice cracking slightly. "Every time someone asked why you never visited, every time she had to spend Christmas alone because you were on some ship somewhere, she would make excuses. Sarah is serving her country. Sarah is doing important work. But where was that important work when she was throwing up from chemo? Where was your duty when she needed help getting dressed?" The words cut deeper than any enemy fire I had ever faced, because they were true. I had chosen the Navy over my family again and again, believing that my service was somehow noble enough to justify the sacrifice. But standing in that sterile hospital hallway, looking at my brothers' tear-stained faces, I realized that nobility meant nothing if it came at the cost of the people you loved most. Mom died 2 days later, quietly slipping away during the early morning hours while I was finally getting some sleep in the visitors' lounge. Marcus was holding her hand when she passed. I was 20 feet away, unconscious and useless. The funeral arrangements happened quickly, and I assumed I would be involved in the planning. Instead, Marcus called me at my hotel to deliver the final blow. "We've decided it would be better if you didn't attend the service," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Mom spent her whole life making excuses for your absence. We're not going to let you turn her funeral into another photo opportunity for your military career." "Marcus, please," I begged, abandoning any pretense of pride. "She was my mother too. I loved her just as much as you did. If you loved her, you would have been here when it mattered. Stay away from the funeral, Sarah. We mean it." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. My own brothers were banning me from saying goodbye to our mother. The woman who had raised me, who had been proud of my achievements even when they took me far from home, would be laid to rest without her daughter present. That's how I ended up sitting in a rental car in the rain, watching my family gather to mourn the woman whose absence would leave a hole in all our lives. I had faced enemy combatants, navigated political minefields in the Pentagon, and commanded respect from some of the toughest officers in the Navy. But I couldn't find a way to honor my own mother's memory because of a family feud that had spiraled beyond all reason. As I sat there, rain streaming down the windows and blurring my view of the chapel, I wondered if Marcus and Dylan were right. Maybe I had chosen wrong. Maybe all those years of service hadn't been worth the price my family had paid. Maybe I deserved to be sitting alone in a parking lot while strangers paid their respects to the woman who had loved me unconditionally, even when I couldn't be there to love her back. The service had been going on for 20 minutes when I noticed the first black SUV pulling into the parking lot. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I watched it navigate slowly between the parked cars, its tinted windows revealing nothing about its occupants. A second vehicle followed, then a third. All identical, all moving with the kind of precision that made my military instincts prick up with recognition. I straightened in my seat, wiping condensation from the window for a better view. The SUVs arranged themselves in a neat formation near the chapel entrance, and for a moment, nothing happened. They just sat there, engines running, like patient predators waiting for the right moment to strike. Then, the doors opened. The first person to emerge was Commander Janet Torres, my former aide-de-camp from my posting in Norfolk. Even in civilian clothes, a sharp black suit that somehow looked more formal than most uniforms, she carried herself with the unmistakable bearing of a naval officer. Behind her came Captain Michael Barnes, whom I recognized from joint operations in the Mediterranean, followed by a steady stream of faces I knew from various commands and postings over my 16-year career. But it wasn't just the officers that made my heart skip. As more vehicles arrived, some military, some civilian, I began to recognize enlisted personnel, Pentagon staffers, and even some Marines I had worked with during a particularly challenging joint operation in the Horn of Africa. They moved through the rain with purpose, their umbrellas creating a coordinated pattern as they approached the chapel entrance.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. That's when I saw him. Admiral James Richardson stepped out of the lead SUV, his silver hair gleaming despite the overcast sky. 4 stars on his shoulders, even in civilian dress, he commanded attention simply by existing. Richardson was a legend in the Navy, a man who had served in 3 wars and shaped modern naval doctrine. More importantly, he was my mentor, the officer who had seen potential in a young lieutenant and pushed her toward greatness. What was he doing here? I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking as I scrolled through my contacts. I needed answers, but before I could place a call, my phone buzzed with an incoming text from Commander Torres. "Stay in your vehicle, we've got this handled." Got what was handled? How did they even know where I was? The group of approximately 30 military personnel had formed a loose formation outside the chapel entrance. I could see Marcus and Dylan through the glass doors, their faces shifting from confusion to alarm as they took in the sight of what looked like a high-level military delegation arriving at their mother's funeral. Admiral Richardson approached the entrance first, his stride confident despite the slick pavement. He spoke briefly to Marcus, who had stepped outside under the covered entryway. I couldn't hear the conversation from my position, but I could see Marcus's body language shift from defensive to uncertain to something approaching panic. Whatever Richardson said, it had an immediate effect. Marcus gestured emphatically, pointing in several directions, probably explaining that this was a private family service, that there had been some mistake, that they weren't expecting any military representatives. But Richardson's expression remained calm and implacable. He was a man accustomed to being obeyed, and civilian funeral directors held no power over him. Dylan joined the conversation, his mechanic swagger somewhat diminished by the presence of so much military brass. I watched him try to assert himself, gesturing aggressively, but Richardson simply nodded politely and continued speaking in that measured tone I remembered from briefings in the Pentagon. Then something shifted. Marcus pulled out his phone, probably trying to call chapel security, or maybe even the police. But before he could complete the call, Captain Barnes stepped forward and handed him what looked like an official document. Marcus read it, his face draining of color, and slowly lowered his phone. My own phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Admiral Richardson himself. "Sarah, I need you to listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you might come as a shock, but your mother's final wishes have come to light, and they override any decisions your brothers might have made regarding the service." "Sir, I don't understand. What final wishes? Mom never mentioned anything about—" 3 weeks before her death, your mother contacted the Navy's Casualty Assistance Program. She was concerned about family tensions and wanted to ensure that your military service would be properly honored at her funeral, regardless of any family disputes that might arise. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Eleanor Mitchell formally requested that the Navy provide honors at her funeral service, specifically citing her pride in your achievements and her concern that family disagreements might prevent proper recognition of your sacrifice and service. She also provided detailed instructions about her own wishes for the service. I stared through the windshield at the scene unfolding before me. My brothers were now in heated discussion with several officers, their gestures becoming more agitated by the minute. Other mourners had begun to notice the commotion, craning their necks to see what was happening at the entrance. "Admiral, my brothers specifically asked me not to attend. What they believe is irrelevant. Your mother was very clear in her instructions. She anticipated this situation and took steps to prevent it. The document Captain Barnes just showed your brothers is a copy of her written request, along with specific instructions she left regarding the service. What kind of instructions? She wanted you to deliver the primary eulogy, Sarah. She wrote it herself, sealed it, and left it with the Navy chaplain's office with explicit instructions that it only be opened and delivered by you. She also requested full military honors, including a flag presentation to you as her surviving military family member. The rain seemed to be falling harder now, drumming against the car roof like machine gun fire. Through the chaos of weather and emotion, I watched my brothers arguing with some of the most senior military officers in the country, completely unaware that their own mother had orchestrated this entire confrontation. She knew this would happen, I whispered, more to myself than to Richardson.
Your mother was a remarkably perceptive woman. In her letter to our office, she wrote extensively about the family tensions and her deep regret that your service had created a rift. She was very clear that while she understood your brother's feelings, she would not allow her death to be used as a weapon against the daughter who had served her country with honor. I could see Dylan throwing his hands up in frustration, while Marcus had pulled out his phone again, probably calling his lawyer. But whatever legal threats he might make would be meaningless against the United States Navy and a deceased woman's final wishes. There's more, Richardson continued. Your mother also left instructions that if your brothers attempted to prevent your attendance, the Navy was authorized to provide escort and ensure your participation in the service. She was quite specific about the protocol she wanted followed. Escort? Look around you, Admiral Mitchell. This isn't just about a funeral anymore. This is about honoring a woman who sacrificed her own happiness so her daughter could serve something larger than herself. And it's about ensuring that the daughter understands the full measure of her mother's love and pride. As if summoned by his words, Commander Torres appeared at my car window, tapping gently on the glass. When I rolled it down, she leaned in with a slight smile. Ma'am, if you're ready, Admiral Richardson would like to escort you into the chapel. Your mother's eulogy is waiting, and I believe there are some people inside who need to hear what she had to say. I looked back toward the chapel entrance, where my brothers now stood, flanked by naval officers like suspects under guard. The other mourners had moved inside to escape the rain, but I could see faces pressed against the windows, watching this unprecedented drama unfold. What if I'm not ready? I asked, surprising myself with the vulnerability in my voice. Torres's expression softened. Ma'am, with respect, you've been ready for this your entire career. You've commanded ships, led men and women into harm's way, and made decisions that affected thousands of lives. Your mother knew that. She trusted you to honor her memory the same way you've honored your oath of service. She paused, rain dripping from her umbrella onto the car door. Besides, she specifically wrote in her instructions that if you hesitated, we were to remind you of something she used to tell you when you were afraid as a child. What? Courage isn't the absence of fear, Sarah. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear. The words hit me like a lightning strike. Mom had said that to me the night before I left for the Naval Academy, when I was terrified that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. She had said it again when I called her before my first combat deployment, and countless times during our phone conversations when I doubted whether I was strong enough for the responsibilities I carried. Even in death, she was still trying to give me the courage I needed. Walking from the car to the chapel entrance felt like crossing a minefield. Each step through the puddle-strewn parking lot carried the weight of 16 years' worth of guilt, resentment, and unresolved grief. Commander Torres held an umbrella over me while Admiral Richardson flanked my other side, their presence both comforting and surreal. Behind us, the formation of military personnel moved with quiet precision, their footsteps creating a rhythm that reminded me of honor guard ceremonies I had attended for fallen comrades. As we approached the covered entrance, I could see Marcus and Dylan waiting like defendants facing a tribunal. Marcus had his lawyer face on, that carefully controlled expression he wore when he was losing a case but refused to admit defeat. Dylan looked like he wanted to punch someone, his hands clenched at his sides and his jaw working furiously as he chewed what was probably his fourth piece of gum since the confrontation began. Sarah, thank
God, you're finally here, Marcus said as soon as I was within earshot, his tone dripping with false relief. There seems to be some sort of misunderstanding about Mom's wishes. These people are claiming she made some kind of military arrangement, but that's impossible. We handled all the funeral planning ourselves. The audacity of his performance was breathtaking. Even faced with official Navy documentation and the presence of a 4-star admiral, he was still trying to control the narrative. Actually, Mr. Mitchell, answered Admiral Richardson smoothly, your mother contacted our casualty assistant office directly and made very specific arrangements. Captain Barnes has copies of all the documentation, including your mother's handwritten letter explaining her reasoning. Dylan stepped forward, his mechanic's directness cutting through his brother's lawyer's speech. Look, I don't care what kind of paperwork you have. This is our mother's funeral, not some military dog and pony show. Sarah lost the right to be here when she chose her career over her family. The words hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Around us, other mourners who had ventured back outside to see what the commotion was about began to murmur among themselves. I recognized some of them, Mom's neighbors, her co-workers from the courthouse.
Distant relatives who had driven in from other states. They were witnessing our family's dirty laundry being aired in public, and I felt the familiar burn of shame that had followed me through years of missed holidays and abbreviated visits. But then Captain Barnes stepped forward with a manila envelope, his voice carrying the authority of official business. Perhaps you'd like to hear your mother's own words, Mr. Mitchell. She was quite eloquent in her letter to our office. He extracted a sheet of courthouse letterhead. Mom had written her request on official paper, probably during her lunch break in those final weeks when she knew death was closing in. Barnes cleared his throat and began to read. To whom it may concern, I am writing to request military honors at my funeral for my daughter, Rear Admiral Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, United States Navy. I am fully aware that my sons, Marcus and Dylan, may attempt to prevent Sarah from attending my service due to long-standing family tensions regarding her military career. However, I want to make my position absolutely clear. Barnes paused, looking up at my brothers before continuing. I could not be more proud of the woman my daughter has become. While her service has meant sacrifices for our family, missed holidays, abbreviated visits, and years of separation, I have never doubted that she chose to serve something greater than herself. The fact that my sons cannot see past their own hurt to recognize her courage and dedication breaks my heart, but it will not diminish my pride in her achievements. Marcus had gone pale, while Dylan's jaw grinding had intensified to the point where I worried about his dental work. Around us, the gathered mourners had fallen silent, hanging on every word of a dead woman's final testament. Furthermore, Barnes continued, if my sons attempt to exclude Sarah from my funeral, I hereby request that the United States Navy provide escort to ensure her attendance. My daughter has spent 16 years serving strangers with honor and courage. The least her own family can do is allow her to say goodbye to her mother. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the rain seemed to pause, as if the weather itself was waiting to see how this family drama would resolve. I could feel the eyes of everyone present, military personnel, mourners, my own brothers, all focused on me, waiting for my response. But then Dylan broke first. That's bullshit, he exploded, his composure finally cracking completely. You want to know about courage and honor? I'll tell you about courage and honor. Courage is showing up when your mother is throwing up blood from chemo. Honor is being there to hold her hand when she's scared and confused and asking where her daughter is. Sarah doesn't know the first thing about either one. His voice was raw with years of accumulated grief and resentment, and I could see tears streaming down his face despite his aggressive stance. You want to make her sound like some kind of hero? She's nothing but a selfish woman who put her precious uniform ahead of the person who loved her the most in the world. The attack hit me like shrapnel, each word finding its mark with surgical precision. Because he wasn't entirely wrong. I had missed those moments. I had chosen duty over family, again and again until the distance between us became unbridgeable.
But then Admiral Richardson stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of decades in command. "Mr. Mitchell, with all due respect, you don't understand the first thing about the sacrifices your sister has made. I've seen Admiral Mitchell command a destroyer through hostile waters while worrying about whether her mother was eating properly. I've watched her make decisions that saved hundreds of lives while carrying the guilt of missing her mother's birthday." He paused, his steely gaze moving between my brothers before continuing. "The night before a critical mission in the Persian Gulf, she called me to request emergency leave because your mother had been hospitalized. When I told her the mission couldn't proceed without her, she accepted that responsibility and stayed at her post. But she spent the entire operation convinced she was making the wrong choice." Richardson's voice softened slightly. "Your sister has carried the weight of those choices for 16 years. Every promotion, every commendation, every moment of professional success has been tempered by the knowledge that it came at the cost of time with your mother. But your mother understood something you apparently don't, that some people are called to serve something larger than their own comfort and convenience." Marcus finally found his voice. "That's a very pretty speech, Admiral, but it doesn't change the fact that Sarah wasn't here when Mom needed her most. All the guilt in the world doesn't make up for absence." "You're absolutely right," I said quietly, surprising everyone, including myself. "It doesn't make up for absence. Nothing can do that." I looked at my brothers, these men that I had grown up with but barely knew anymore, and felt the weight of every Christmas morning I had missed, every family crisis I had handled over the phone, every moment when duty had trumped love. But Mom understood something that you don't. She understood that the choices I made weren't easy ones. She understood that every time I chose to stay at my post instead of coming home, it broke my heart a little bit more. And she understood that despite all the pain and guilt and missed opportunities, I was trying to honor the values she taught me. I took a deep breath, feeling the presence of 30 military personnel at my back like a wall of support. She taught me that sometimes doing the right thing means sacrificing what you want most. She taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but doing what needs to be done despite the fear. And she taught me that love isn't measured in hours spent together, but in the willingness to make sacrifices for something greater than yourself.
The chapel doors opened behind us, and Father Mackenzie, the elderly priest who had known our family for years, stepped outside. His weathered face took in the scene, the military formation, the family confrontation, the crowd of onlookers, with the calm acceptance of someone who had seen every variety of human drama play out in his sanctuary. "I believe," he said in his gentle Irish accent, "that Eleanor Mitchell is waiting for her children to come inside and say goodbye. All of her children." He held up a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Mom's familiar handwriting. "She left this for you, Sarah, along with very specific instructions about what she wanted said at her service. Perhaps it's time we honored her wishes instead of our own hurt feelings." The moment stretched between us like a bridge over a chasm. My brothers on one side, me on the other, and 30 years of family history weighing on the span between. In the distance, I could hear the chapel organ playing softly, and I realized that somewhere inside that building, our mother was waiting for us to find our way back to each other, or at least waiting for us to try. The interior of Sacred Heart Chapel felt like stepping into a different world. The warm glow of stained glass windows cast colored shadows across the gathered mourners, and the scent of lilies, Mom's favorite flower, filled the air with a sweetness that made my throat tighten. Every pew was packed, faces turning toward our procession as Admiral Richardson escorted me down the center aisle, while Marcus and Dylan reluctantly followed behind. I recognized most of the faces from different chapters of Mom's life. There was Mrs. Kowalski from next door, who had shared countless cups of coffee and neighborhood gossip across our kitchen table. Behind her sat Judge Harrison from the courthouse, still wearing his judicial bearing even in civilian clothes. The entire third row was filled with women from Mom's book club,
their tear-stained faces reflecting the genuine affection they had held for the woman who never missed a monthly meeting despite her illness. But what struck me most was how many people I didn't recognize. Young courthouse clerks who looked barely out of college, elderly neighbors I had never met during my brief visits home, and what appeared to be an entire family of strangers who had somehow been touched by Mom's life in ways I knew nothing about. The chapel held nearly 200 people, and I realized with a sharp pang that my mother had built an entire community while I was serving my country half a world away. Father Mackenzie took his place at the altar, while the military personnel arranged themselves along the sidewalls with the precision of a ceremonial guard. Their presence transformed the intimate family service into something grander, a formal recognition of sacrifice that transcended the personal grief we were all carrying. The priest's voice carried clearly through the chapel as he began the traditional funeral liturgy, but I barely heard the words. My attention was focused on the sealed envelope in my hands, Mom's final message, written in the careful script I remembered from birthday cards and care packages. The paper felt fragile between my fingers, as if it might crumble under the weight of everything it represented. When Father Mackenzie called my name to deliver the eulogy, the chapel fell into complete silence. I rose on unsteady legs, feeling the weight of 200 pairs of eyes as I made my way to the podium. Behind me, I could sense Marcus's and Dylan's tension radiating like heat from a furnace, their disapproval palpable even without turning to look. I placed the envelope on the podium and carefully broke the seal, unfolding the single sheet of courthouse letterhead that contained my mother's final words. Her handwriting was shakier than I remembered. The cancer had already begun stealing her strength when she wrote this, but every word was clear and deliberate. "My dear Sarah," I began, reading her words aloud to the assembled mourners. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you are standing where I always hoped you would stand, before the people who loved me, speaking the words I could never find the courage to say while I was alive." The words caught in my throat, and I had to pause to compose myself. In the front row, I could see Mrs. Kowalski dabbing at her eyes with the tissue, while Judge Harrison sat with his hands folded and his head bowed in respectful attention. "I want you to know," I continued reading, "that every day you were away serving our country, I was proud. Not just proud of your achievements, though heaven knows I bragged about my admiral daughter to anyone who would listen, but proud of the woman you chose to become. You chose to serve something greater than yourself, just as I taught you to do when you were small." I glanced up briefly and saw that Marcus was staring at his hands, his lawyer's composure finally beginning to crack. Dylan had his arms crossed tightly across his chest, but I could see the conflict playing across his features as he heard our mother's actual feelings expressed in her own words. "But then I would read about your accomplishments in the Navy newsletter, or see you on the news during some crisis half a world away, and I would remember why I was proud to let you go. You were saving lives, Sarah. You were protecting people who would never know your name. You were carrying forward the values I tried to instill in you: courage, integrity, and service to others." The chapel had become so quiet I could hear the rain still pattering against the windows. Judge Harrison had removed his glasses and was wiping them carefully, while several of the courthouse clerks were openly crying. "Your brothers see only what they lost," I read on. "They see the empty chair at Christmas dinner and the phone calls that replaced hugs, but I saw what the world gained. I saw my daughter commanding respect in a profession that didn't always welcome women. I saw her making decisions that affected thousands of lives, carrying the weight of responsibility that would crush most people." I had to stop again, overwhelmed by the power of my mother's words and the realization that she had understood my choices better than I had ever given her credit for. In her final letter, she was absolving me of guilt I had carried for 16 years. I never told you this while I was alive because I was afraid it would sound like I was trying to diminish the sacrifice our family made for your career. But I need you to hear it now. I would rather have a daughter who serves her country with honor than a daughter who stays close to home but never reaches her potential. I would rather be proud of you from a distance than disappointed in you up close. The words hit the congregation like a physical force. I could see heads shaking in amazement, faces turning to look at Marcus and Dylan with new understanding. Their mother had not been the victim they portrayed her as. She had been a willing partner in her daughter's service, proud of the sacrifices that had enabled my career. To my sons, the letter continued, and I felt Marcus and Dylan stiffen behind me. You gave me the greatest gift a mother can receive, your presence. You were there for every milestone, every crisis, every moment when I needed help or comfort. You showed me love through action, through sacrifice, through the daily commitment that true family requires. Never doubt that I appreciated every moment you gave me. I could hear Dylan's sharp intake of breath, and when I glanced back, I saw that both my brothers were crying openly now, their anger beginning to transform into something more complex. But, I continued reading, love is not a competition. The love Sarah showed me through her service was different from the love you showed me through your presence, but it was no less real and no less precious. She honored me by becoming the woman I raised her to be. She honored our family by carrying our values into places I could never go and situations I could never imagine. Mom's letter was performing a kind of miracle, reframing our entire family history through the lens of her own perspective. She wasn't choosing sides in our conflict, she was revealing that there had never been sides to choose. I am dying knowing that I raised 3 children who love me deeply, each in their own way. Marcus, with his dedication to justice and his fierce protection of our family. Dylan, with his loyalty and his willingness to drop everything when I needed help. And Sarah, with her courage to serve something greater than herself, even when that service required sacrificing what she wanted most. The letter was nearing its end, and I could feel the congregation hanging on every word. These people had come to mourn Eleanor Mitchell, but they were discovering depths to her character they had never suspected. Sarah, when you finish reading this letter, I want you to look out at the people gathered in this chapel. These are the people whose lives I touched in small ways. Neighbors I helped, co-workers I supported, friends I loved. But you touched lives on a scale I could never achieve. You commanded ships, led personnel, made decisions that affected national security. You served your country with the same dedication I tried to show in raising my children. I looked up as she instructed, seeing the faces of Mom's community reflected back at me. But now I also saw something else. Understanding, respect, and perhaps even admiration for the choices that had taken me away from this place. Do not let your brother's grief diminish your pride in what you have accomplished. Do not let guilt over my death overshadow the honor of your service. And do not ever forget that somewhere in heaven, your mother is still bragging about her admiral daughter to anyone who will listen. The letter was signed simply, with all my love and endless pride, Mom. I folded the paper carefully and looked out at the congregation, seeing my mother's life reflected in their faces, a life of quiet service, community involvement, and deep love for her children, even when that love required letting them go.
The silence that followed Mom's final words stretched like an eternity. I remained at the podium, clutching her letter, watching the faces of 200 people process the weight of what they had just heard. Some were crying openly, others sat in stunned contemplation, and a few, like Judge Harrison, nodded slowly as if pieces of a long puzzle were finally falling into place. Father Mackenzie approached the podium, his weathered hand gently touching my shoulder. "Thank you, Sarah," he said quietly, his Irish accent thick with emotion. "Your mother would be proud." He then addressed the congregation with the closing prayers, but I barely heard them. My attention was focused on Marcus and Dylan, who sat frozen in the front pew like statues carved from grief and confusion.
As the service concluded, Admiral Richardson stepped forward with crisp military precision. Ladies and gentlemen, by request of the deceased, we will now provide military honors for Eleanor Mitchell, mother of Rear Admiral Sarah Mitchell, United States Navy. What happened next was breathtaking in its solemnity. The naval personnel moved with choreographed precision, forming an honor guard around Mom's casket. Commander Torres approached me with a folded American flag, not because Mom had served, but because she had given her daughter to serve. The presentation was normally reserved for military funerals, but Eleanor Mitchell had specifically requested this recognition of her family's sacrifice. On behalf of a grateful nation, Torres said formally, placing the flag in my hands, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your mother's service to our country through her daughter. The weight of the folded flag in my arms felt heavier than any responsibility I had carried in 16 years of naval service. This wasn't just about honoring Mom. It was about acknowledging that military families serve too, in their own way, through sacrifice and separation and the constant worry that comes with loving someone in uniform. As the honor guard performed the traditional rifle salute outside the chapel, the sharp crack of blank rounds echoing across the cemetery, I finally saw my brother's composure break completely. Marcus buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs he had been holding back for months. Dylan made no attempt to hide his tears, letting them stream down his face as he watched military personnel honor the woman who had raised us all. The graveside ceremony was smaller, limited to immediate family and close friends. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and sharp with the scent of wet earth and fresh flowers. As Father Mackenzie spoke the final prayers over Mom's casket, I found myself standing between my brothers for the first time in years, the three of us united in grief, if nothing else. When the ceremony ended, most of the mourners began to disperse, offering quiet condolences before heading back to their cars. But Marcus, Dylan, and I remained by the grave, none of us quite ready to leave Mom in the ground and return to our separate lives. It was Dylan who spoke first, his voice hoarse from crying. I never knew she felt that way about your service. All those years I thought... He trailed off, shaking his head. You thought what? I asked gently. You thought she was just making excuses for you. When people would ask why you never visited, why you missed Christmas again, why you couldn't be here when she got sick, I thought she was covering up how much it hurt her. Marcus cleared his throat, his lawyer's training helping him find words even in his emotional state. We both did. We saw her crying after your phone calls sometimes, saw how she would stare at that world map in the kitchen, tracking where you were deployed. We thought your career was breaking her heart. It was, I said quietly, surprising them both, but not in the way you think. She told me once, during one of our calls, that the hardest part wasn't missing me. It was knowing that my brothers thought she was a victim of my choices when she was actually proud of them. The three of us stood in silence, processing this new understanding of our family dynamic. Mom hadn't just been caught in the middle of our conflict. She had been actively protecting all of us from our own misunderstandings. She played us, Dylan said suddenly, and I could hear the beginning of a smile in his voice despite his tears. She knew exactly what she was doing with that letter. She knew we'd ban you from the funeral, and she knew the Navy would show up to set us straight. Marcus actually chuckled through his tears. You have to admire the strategy. Even dead, she found a way to get her stubborn children in the same room and force us to listen to each other. Admiral Richardson approached us then, his presence commanding even in this intimate family moment. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but I wanted you all to understand something about your sister's service record. He looked directly at Marcus and Dylan. In 16 years, Admiral Mitchell has never once requested emergency leave for personal reasons without also volunteering to extend her deployment to make up for the time. She's never missed a critical mission or abandoned her post, but she's never stopped trying to find ways to be present for your family. Richardson pulled out a folder from his briefcase. These are copies of every request she's made over the years. Applications for stateside assignments so she could be closer to home, requests for leave during your mother's illness, even a letter she wrote offering to resign her commission entirely if it would help her to be there for your mother's final months. Marcus took the folder with shaking hands. She offered to resign?
Multiple times. I denied every request because the Navy needs officers like your sister, but also because I knew your mother wouldn't want her daughter to sacrifice her career for family guilt. Eleanor Mitchell made that very clear in her conversations with our casualty assistance office. Dylan looked at me with something approaching awe. You never told us you were trying to get stationed closer to home. Because it never worked out, I said. The needs of the Navy always came first, and I accepted that. But I tried every year to find a way to serve my country and still be the daughter Mom deserved. Richardson smiled slightly. Your mother told our chaplain that she was prouder of your attempts to balance duty and family than she would have been if you had simply chosen one over the other. She said it proved you understood the complexity of real love. As the Admiral departed with the rest of the military personnel, the three of us found ourselves alone with Mom's grave for the first time. The late afternoon sun had broken through the clouds, casting long shadows across the cemetery and warming the air just enough to make standing there bearable. So, what happens now? Dylan asked. I mean, with us. It was the question I had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. Our family had been fractured for so long that I wasn't sure we knew how to be siblings anymore. I don't know, I admitted. I've got orders to report to the Pentagon next month. New assignment, new responsibilities. The Navy doesn't stop moving just because we've figured out how to talk to each other. Marcus nodded slowly. But maybe we could try talking more than once every few years? Mom always said family wasn't about geography. It was about effort. I'd like that, I said, meaning it more than I had meant anything in years. And maybe next Christmas, if I can get leave. You'll come home, Dylan finished, and we'll try to remember that home isn't just about showing up physically. It's about showing up emotionally, even when you're thousands of miles away. As we walked back toward our cars, I realized that Mom had given us more than just her final words. She had given us a new understanding of what it meant to love someone whose calling took them far from home. She had shown us that pride and grief could coexist, that sacrifice and love were often the same thing, and that family bonds could survive even the most impossible circumstances. The American flag still folded in my arms felt like a bridge between my two worlds, the Navy that had shaped me and the family that had made me. For the first time in 16 years, I didn't feel like I had to choose between them. Mom had made sure of that, even in death. The woman who had always been the glue holding our family together had found a way to repair us one last time, using her own final words to heal wounds that seemed impossible to bridge. As I drove away from Sacred Heart Cemetery, I couldn't help but smile through my tears. Somewhere, I was certain, Eleanor Mitchell was bragging to the angels about how she had managed to get her stubborn children to finally understand each other. Even in heaven, she was probably still playing peacemaker. 6 months after Mom's funeral, I was sitting in my new office at the Pentagon when my secretary buzzed through with an unexpected call. Admiral Mitchell, you have Dylan Mitchell on line 2. He says he's your brother? I smiled at the uncertainty in her voice. My family rarely called me at work, and when they did, it was usually for emergencies. But over the past few months, that has started to change, in small but meaningful ways. Dylan? I answered, swiveling my chair to look out at the Virginia skyline. Everything okay? Better than okay. His voice carried an excitement I hadn't heard since we were kids. Sarah, you need to sit down for this. I just got off the phone with someone from the Eleanor Mitchell Foundation. What? Apparently, some of the people at Mom's funeral were so moved by her story that they started a foundation in her name. It's designed to support military families dealing with the challenges of separation and service. They want to use her letter as the centerpiece of their mission statement. I felt my breath catch. Dylan, I never gave anyone permission to... They're not asking for permission to use the letter. They're asking if you'll serve on the board of directors. They want the admiral, daughter Mom was so proud of, to help guide their work.
The irony wasn't lost on me.
Mom's final act of family reconciliation was now inspiring others to bridge the gap between military service and family connection. Even in death, she was still trying to heal the wounds that duty and distance could create. "There's more," Dylan continued. "Marcus is already on board. Apparently they need legal counsel for the nonprofit setup. And they want me to help with fundraising since I know the local business community. It would be the three of us, working together for the first time since we were teenagers." I leaned back in my chair, processing the magnitude of what he was suggesting. The Mitchell siblings, united in purpose for the first time in decades, carrying forward Mom's legacy of understanding and support. "What exactly would this foundation do?" I asked. "Support services for military spouses, counseling for families dealing with deployment stress, financial assistance for children whose parents are deployed during critical times. But the core mission is education, helping civilian communities understand the sacrifices military families make, and helping military families navigate the guilt and separation that comes with service." The phone was quiet for a moment while I absorbed the implications. This wasn't just about creating a memorial to Mom. It was about addressing the very issues that had nearly destroyed our family. "Dylan, this is incredible, but I need to think about it. My position here at the Pentagon, my security clearance, the optics of a serving admiral being involved in civilian advocacy work." "Already covered," he said with a laugh. "Marcus had his firm research the legal implications before we even called you. As long as the foundation maintains political neutrality and focuses on family support rather than policy advocacy, there's no conflict. He's got a whole brief prepared if you want to see it." That evening, I found myself in my Arlington apartment reading through a 30-page legal analysis that Marcus had prepared with his characteristic thoroughness. The Eleanor Mitchell Foundation would be structured as a 501c3 nonprofit focused specifically on education and support services. No political lobbying, no policy advocacy, just practical help for families navigating the challenges we had faced. The mission statement, drafted by people who had been at Mom's funeral, was startling in its clarity. To bridge the understanding between military service and family life, recognizing that both represent forms of love and sacrifice that deserve honor and support. My phone rang again, this time showing Marcus's number. "I know you're reading the brief," he said without preamble. "What do you think?" "I think it's exactly what Mom would have wanted," I admitted. "But Marcus, are you sure about this? 6 months ago, you could barely stand to be in the same room with me." "6 months ago, I thought your career was the enemy of our family," he replied. "Now I realize that the real enemy was our inability to understand each other's choices. This foundation could help other families avoid the mistakes we made." "Have you talked to Patricia about this? The time commitment, the public exposure?" "Patricia was the one who suggested I call you first," Marcus said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "She said if we were going to honor Mom's memory, we needed to do it together. The boys are excited too. They want to tell their friends their aunt is a real admiral." That last comment hit me unexpectedly hard. Marcus's twin sons, now 8 years old, had been toddlers when our family rift began. They barely knew me, and what they did know came filtered through years of family tension. The idea that they might actually be proud of their aunt felt like a gift I didn't deserve. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "The foundation has already received its first major donation. Judge Harrison left $50,000 in his will specifically for this purpose. Apparently, Mom's story affected him more deeply than any of us realized." Judge Harrison had died just 2 weeks after Mom's funeral, and his unexpected bequest suggested that her words had resonated far beyond our immediate family. The ripple effects of her final letter were expanding in ways none of us could have anticipated. "When would we need to make a decision?" I asked. "The organizational meeting is next month. They want to launch officially on what would have been Mom's birthday. Sarah, I know this is a lot to ask, especially given everything that's happened between us, but I can't think of a better way to honor what she was trying to tell us." After we hung up, I sat in my apartment looking at the folded American flag from Mom's funeral, now displayed in a place of honor on my bookshelf. Next to it was a framed photo from my promotion ceremony. Mom beaming with pride despite the pain medication that was already becoming a constant part of her life.
The next morning, I called Admiral Richardson to discuss the foundation proposal. His response was immediate and enthusiastic. "Sarah, this is exactly the kind of initiative the Navy should support. We've been struggling for years with family readiness issues, deployment stress, and retention problems related to family concerns. A foundation focused on education and support rather than policy advocacy could be invaluable." "You don't think it would create any conflicts with my position?" "On the contrary, I think it would enhance your effectiveness. You'd be representing the human side of military service, the personal cost that families pay for national security. That perspective is often missing from policy discussions." 3 weeks later, I found myself in a conference room at Marcus's law firm, sitting across from Dylan and my lawyer brother as we reviewed the foundation's bylaws. The surreal nature of the situation wasn't lost on any of us. The siblings who had spent years unable to have a civil conversation were now planning a joint venture to honor their mother's memory. "I have one condition," I said as we reached the signature page. "Mom's letter stays complete and unedited. No sanitizing her words to make them more palatable for public consumption. If we're going to use her story, we use all of it. The anger, the hurt, the complexity of loving someone whose duty takes them away." "Agreed," Marcus said immediately. "The power of her message is in its honesty, not in making military service seem easy or painless." Dylan nodded. "People need to understand that supporting military families means acknowledging the real cost of service, not pretending it doesn't exist." As I signed my name to the founding documents, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. 6 months ago, I had been banned from my own mother's funeral, sitting alone in a rental car while my family gathered to mourn without me. Now we were creating something that could help other families avoid the pain and misunderstanding that had nearly destroyed ours. The Eleanor Mitchell Foundation held its first public event on Mom's birthday, exactly 1 year after her death. The venue was the same chapel where her funeral had been held, but this time the atmosphere was celebratory rather than mournful. Military families from across Connecticut gathered to hear speakers discuss the challenges of service, the importance of community support, and the ways that love could transcend distance and duty. I stood at the same podium where I had read Mom's letter, looking out at an audience that included active duty personnel, military spouses, children who had grown up with deployed parents, and civilians who simply wanted to understand and support their military neighbors. My mother's final gift to her children wasn't just reconciliation. It was the understanding that love isn't diminished by distance or sacrifice. It's actually strengthened by it, when both the service member and the family understand that their sacrifice serves something greater than themselves. In the front row, Marcus and Dylan sat with their families, their children listening intently as their aunt spoke about honor, duty, and the complexity of loving someone in uniform. Behind them, I could see Mrs. Kowalski and other neighbors from Mom's street, courthouse employees who had worked with her for decades, and dozens of people whose lives she had touched in ways I was still discovering. After the event, as we cleaned up the chapel and prepared to head home, Dylan handed me a manila envelope. "One more surprise," he said with a grin. "We found this when we were cleaning out Mom's house." Inside was another letter in Mom's handwriting, this one addressed to all 3 of us together. The date showed she had written it just days before her death, apparently as a follow-up to the funeral instructions she had left with the Navy. "My dear children," the letter began, "if you are reading this together, it means my plan worked and you have found your way back to each other. I always knew that underneath your anger and hurt, you still loved each other as much as you loved me." The letter went on to describe her hopes for our future relationship, her pride in all our accomplishments, and her dream that we might find a way to honor her memory by helping other families avoid the mistakes we had made. But it was the final paragraph that brought tears to my eyes. "Sarah, Your brothers were right that I missed you terribly during your years of service, but they were wrong about why. I didn't miss you because I resented your career. I missed you because I was so proud of what you were accomplishing that I wanted to share every moment of it with you. The hardest part of your deployments wasn't the separation. It was knowing that you were out there being the woman I raised you to be, and I couldn't be there to see it firsthand. As the three of us stood in the chapel where Mom's funeral had taken place, reading her final words in the place where her story had ended and ours had begun again, I realized that she had given us something more valuable than reconciliation. She had given us purpose. The Eleanor Mitchell Foundation would go on to help hundreds of military families navigate the challenges of service and separation. But its real success wasn't measured in programs delivered or families served. It was measured in the understanding that love, sacrifice, and duty could coexist, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the freedom to serve something greater than themselves. Mom had spent her final months orchestrating our reunion, but her real legacy was the lesson she taught us, that true love doesn't demand presence, it demands understanding. And sometimes the deepest form of love is letting go.
Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.